Hello everybody, Kelly Rice here, but I write under my pen name K.M. Rice, and welcome to my author vlog. My regular viewers will notice that I missed a few weeks in posting, but I am back now, and hopefully still in fit vlogging shape. I'm still getting over a slight cold, which kind of, kept me from filming for a while because I tried to do that once and nobody commented that it was gross, that I was like blowing my nose and stuff. Maybe I edited that out, but nobody likes a sick voice. Actually, that's not true. There are some people who like sick voices. But I'm relatively okay now. And what's even lifting my spirits more is the fact that Ophelia Afterworld Book 1 is now available. It was released on May 18th, and I had a book launch party. And I will do an episode about my book launch party and how I went about it and how successful I gauged it. But yeah, that'll probably be my next episode. This one's not going to be on that though. So it's very exciting to me to have this book out in the world and to know that you guys can now finally see what I've been talking about all this time when I'm making references to this series and to these characters and to this world. And I think it will also be helpful because without spoiling it, I will also be able to then make references to it as I'm filming these vlogs, and it won't always be Darkling. So, because this story covers a lot more ground than Darkling does. It touches on subjects Darkling can't. It's set in the here and now, about modern young people, which is something that was a big challenge for me at the start. But then I learned to love it. I learned to love it, and it took away my ability to hide behind ghosts and other supernatural twists and turns, which isn't to say that there isn't a supernatural twist in this story. But writing about my peers at the time, because I did write this 5 years ago, I think. So now I'm like old. I'm older than all my characters, which is strange. But yeah, it's been quite the experience. I'm delighted that you can now share this experience with me and pick up your copy. You can get them on, of course, on Amazon.com. If you're into ebooks, you can get them off Amazon or iBooks, iTunes. And if you would like an autographed copy, you can purchase one directly from me, because I obviously can't sign it if it's from Amazon. It's just being shipped from some warehouse, so I just have a couple lying around the house, and not like lying around as in they're going to be beat up and kicked and chewed on by my dog, but that way I can sign them for you or for whomever you're purchasing it for and send it out to you. So that's through my Etsy shop, and all these links should be in the description below. And yeah, so far this book seems to elicit powerful reactions from people. I wasn't quite anticipating that, but I also tried not to visualize too much of what people were going to think, because that's either going to psych you out one way or the other. But yes, it's elicited some very strong reactions, and thankfully mostly in the positive vein. And that's especially good, because this is book 1 of so far 4. Might stay 4, but you never know. These things sometimes take on a life of their own. Speaking of taking on a life of their own, that leads me to today's question. This one was sent in on Twitter. I believe this person's name is Callan Anthony McPherson. Says, I have an odd question. I have been working and reworking my work in progress, my WIP, but I have a narrator starting the piece, and although it's a main character, he's not my protagonist. Would it be plausible to seamlessly make the transition back and forth as the story progresses? Thank you, Callan. I hope that's your name. I hope I'm not butchering it. I'm always afraid I'm butchering people's names. So, again, for those of you just watching, if you have a question for me or subject you want me to cover, go ahead, send me a tweet. I don't check Twitter nearly as often as I should, but I'll hopefully eventually see, and if I don't, send it again. Like, just annoy me. You're not really gonna annoy me, just, you're gonna get on my radar. Instagram, Facebook, all those things. So, YouTube the comments here, that's a very easy place to leave your questions. So, that is how you get me to offer my thoughts on whatever it is that, you're struggling with or curious about. So, The short answer to this question is yes. However, it might take a little bit of finagling. The first book that popped into my mind when I read your question was Dracula. I don't know if you've read Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it's an I always stumble over this word. Epistolatory book, which means it is told largely in letters, but also in journal entries and I believe some transcribed audio recordings. So the story is not told in third person by a narrator. It is pieced together more or less by the different characters sharing, different parts of the account. And I highly recommend Dracula if you have not read it, because especially when you're with Mina and Lucy, the slow build of suspense is just masterful. And of course we go into it knowing the secret, because we've all grown up in a world post-Dracula, so we know that there's a vampire in the story. But if you can imagine being in a place where you don't know what's going on, and you still may very well be surprised even with knowing that Dracula is a vampire. It is a remarkable feat in storytelling. So, like I said, my first thought was of stories that are told grippingly from different points of view. And you question then, who is the protagonist? Who is the protagonist in Dracula? I would argue that there are three. That there's Jonathan, there is Mina, and there is Van Helsing, Dr. Van Helsing. Because they are all characters who take action. Your question made me have a question of my own, which is, what is a protagonist? The short version, from what I learned in my very first script that I wrote, was, how do you identify a protagonist? That may sound really infantile and like you should know, everyone should know, that's like kindergarten of writing school, but sometimes it's trickier than you think. The protagonist, the easiest definition of a protagonist is the character who goes through the most change. So that kind of throws my other definition out the window that I just gave, because all those characters in Dracula make things happen. I think it's very important for your protagonist to be a character of agency. But who goes through the most change in the story? So, Colin, if your narrator who begins the story is going to be someone who goes through a big change, maybe they actually are your protagonist. But maybe they aren't. The first script that I wrote was called Bus Stop. I've spoken about it before in this vlog. It was loosely based on real life events about me and my best friend Katie traveling to my future university to get my textbooks before the semester started, and all the mishaps that happened on the way. And of course I embellished it and I added other real life events that have happened to me, but they didn't all happen on that day, but I added those in. Excuse me. Oh, I just dribbled. How do I always manage to dribble when I'm filming? I don't dribble this much in real life. Because this is fake life, as you know. Just because I'm talking to a camera. Anyway, Bus Stop. One of the first pieces of advice that my screenwriting professor gave me was, you need to identify who's the protagonist. And I thought, well, it's based on real life. I'm the protagonist, right? Because it was about me and my best friend at the time. Kelly and Katie. So he was like, I don't know. Look at the story. Look who actually is going through change as a person in the story. And that really opened my eyes, because I realized it wasn't the character who was based on me. That character was like, I'm going to this school, I'm getting my books, I'm going to study, and in the fall, or a week later I think is when this classes start, this is what I'm going to do, this is going to be my thing. And the character of Katie was a homeschooled character, and she was nervous about, well, how is this going to change our dynamic? You're going to school an hour away and you're not going to be home anymore, and is this going to change things for us and our friendship and our relationship? So it's kind of, I guess, a coming of age story, a growing pains story. And Katie's character doesn't just come out at the beginning and say, listen, these are my worries about you going to this school that's far away or whatever. Of course, that slowly comes out as the story unfolds until they have a conversation where they directly confront that, and because this is how life turned out and this is how life should turn out. It doesn't matter where I'm going to school, we're still going to be best friends. You know, we've been friends since we were 8. We're going to keep growing together as people. So, sorry, spoiler, but I really don't think Bus Stop's ever going to be produced or read by anyone ever again, so I don't feel bad sharing that. It was more of a writing experience, a learning experience writing it. So, that opened my eyes in terms of realizing the protagonist was not who I thought they were, because Katie's character then comes full circle and realizes I have been putting pressure on her all this time, trying to get her to change her mind about where she's going to school and trying to keep things as they are, and then she comes to a place where she realizes it's okay. Change is okay. And sometimes change is more than okay, sometimes change is good, sometimes change is something that should be welcomed with open arms. So, that's how I realized that Katie was actually the protagonist. That said, I'm of the mind that you could have multiple protagonists. And so maybe that does kind of go back to Dracula. Maybe those 3 characters I listed are each a protagonist. I don't think that there has to be one protagonist and one villain. That's kind of mimicking the hero's journey and a mythic structure, which does work well in that sphere and in certain genres, but I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say that that is a rule that, you know, when it comes to storytelling there are rules, but there aren't rules, because you want to be free and fluid, and follow where your muse takes you and where the story takes you and where the characters take you. There are benefits to following archetypes and patterns and the 3-act structure, all of that. However, don't let it clip your wings. So, Colin, if you're writing this right now and you feel like you might have 2 protagonists, then pursue that. See what happens. I am 100% for experimentation. Someone watching this just perverted that. But I'm for experimentation because you never know where your creativity is going to take you. And someone just perverted that. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just perverting my own words. But you never know where your own creativity is going to take you. And as I've talked about before on this vlog, when I talk about the writing process, I think it's important that you just keep going. And because sometimes you need to write a story in a certain way before you can take a step back and take a deep breath and look at it and go, okay, for whatever psychological reason, I had to get it out this way, but I actually want to change things and tell it a different way. You know, I know that just because I'm the person sitting in front of the camera talking to you, and because I have these degrees and awards and have books out there and have worked for What a Workshop, whatever it is that is to my name that is, or I have experience, you know, whatever it is that's making you listen to this and think, oh, I want to hear her point of view, it's valid, she's giving me good advice. I'm not saying don't listen to me, but I am far from being an authority. And so this is book 1. Book 2 is coming out. Oh, I dribbled on it when I had that dribbling incident. Don't worry, I will not send you this book if you order from me. This is my proof copy anyway. But when I started writing book 2, I had a lot of trouble getting into it, and I was, well, I would say 10 to 12, maybe even up to 20,000 words into the story when I realized this is totally off the track. Like, this is not where I want to be going. Yes, it's all the characters are there. Yes, the setting is there. Yes, the spoiler, not spoiler, history is there. But the story wasn't falling into place for me in a way that felt right, or a way that really felt like it was going anywhere. It was more just kind of exploring the circumstances, exploring the people. And I think, though, that I had to write that version, and I had to get it out that way, before I could then start all over, because that's what I ended up doing. I ended up starting all over. So I wrote maybe a fourth of the book, I don't know. I wrote a big chunk. And I remember this vividly because I remember being all proud of myself. Oh, I wrote a lot today. And I went to go see the midnight release of Hunger Games with my sister. And she was like, oh, what'd you do? Did you make progress? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, oh, great. I can't wait to hear it, because she's the biggest Afterworld fan. And as I would write, she would get to hear. And I was like, yeah, I actually, you know, that works too, having someone motivate you like that, because you're like, oh, I better get some done so that so-and-so can hear it. So I felt like I'd accomplished something. And it slowly started to dawn on me that I hadn't, because it wasn't the story that needed to be told. And that's always very frustrating, because you feel like you just wasted all that effort. It wasn't wasted, and it's never wasted, and that's why I say experiment and see it through until you get to a point where you feel like, I do need to turn back. There's something really off. And that's what happened to me. I let it sit for several months, and I didn't look over what I'd written. I didn't expose myself to it again. I just let it sit. I realized I was pushing myself, and I wasn't ready to tell this part of the story yet. After that time went by, I returned to it, reinvigorated, as it were. I think I heard a song that really triggered something for me. It was one of those rush of inspiration moments, and I just started writing again from chapter 1 of book 2, and that became the book that is now Afterworld Book 2, Priestess. So I know that this isn't directly related to your question in terms of can you switch fluidly from points of view, but I hope that it helps you in terms of knowing that there are no hard and fast rules, that if these two characters are vying for your attention and are both trying to tell the story, let them. And you will be surprised, when it comes to the mechanics of storytelling, you will be surprised at what readers can accept. When you're the one doing it, you feel like, this is ludicrous, no one's gonna get this, I'm asking too much of the readers. Then take a step back and look at other examples of something similar. Like I was just talking about Dracula. This is a book written at the turn of the last century. And it was completely told from lots of different points of view. And it is a classic. You know, people are able to read it and understand it and be entertained by it. And it's not asking too much of them to be reading it from various points of view. And in various mediums, like various different styles. So just remind yourself that most people who read do so somewhat regularly. And the act of reading is an act of, I like to think, edification. But it's at the very least, it's an intellectual act. You're going to be somewhat more worldly, if not educated, by reading. Even if it's fiction, because you're exposing yourself to a different point of view. So trust your reader. Trust your reader's intelligence. And, but that said, get feedback if you're nervous at all about things not being clear. I've spoken about this before. This book has some complicated, I guess, rules in it, I'll say, for lack of better descriptor. So it was important to me that I get feedback on that, on the plot. Like, does it make sense? You know, regardless of the grammar or the pacing or, you know, all the other things that you want to make sure you get as right as possible. Do the mechanics of the actual story make sense? Were there parts where you were confused? Someone might be confused. That person might have been reading it and being interrupted multiple times by their kids or their dog or whatever, or they're driving and they're just reading it in the parking lot, and that part got confusing because of their outside circumstances. However, if more than one person and if multiple people are like, no, yeah, that was also a little weird to me too, I had to read that part again. Okay, that's important. You need to pay attention to that, and yes, look for ways that you can smooth it over a little. But don't be afraid to take risks. You know, I was in this weird class once in college. I think it was for my minor, humanities, and it was like our capstone course. It was just some class I had to take to graduate, and I couldn't even tell you what we did in it other than write papers. But I remember my professor was saying something and kind of spooked herself. And she said this quote that's always stuck with me because I loved it, and she said, "It's always an amazing thing when you're afraid of the audacity of your own thoughts." So go for the audacious, take those risks. And if you're not taking risks, there might not be as big of rewards. So I'm all for it, in life and in writing. Alright, Colin, sorry. I know that was a meandering response, but that's kind of how this vlog works. You guys know by now that I'm not a paint-by-numbers gal, though I have done that in the past when I was a kid. I do not think you can write by numbers, and I do not think that there is any way that anyone can sit you down and say this is how you tell a story and this is how you write. I think that that's a personal journey that we're all on. It's oftentimes a very spiritual journey, no matter what your faith is or lack of faith is. But it's something that is coming from this essence inside of you here and in very strange places here. And it's all about learning to trust those voices and trust those impulses and trust those paths. And neurologically speaking, reinforce those creative pathways so that they strengthen. So I hope this was of some use to you. Like I said, it's meandering, but it's kind of stream of thought. That's how I do this vlog. And I try my best to make sure it's all cohesive and comes back in at the end. And that way, it's more like we're having a conversation rather than me being like, number 1, do this, number 2, do that. And there are vlogs out there that will do that for you. So watch them all. See what helps the most. And go for it. So right now, I just had the thought that I should have a little catchphrase I say at the end of this, like, happy writing, guys! And I almost did it as if it's my thing, because I'm like, I'm a YouTuber, happy writing, kids! And then I got scared of myself, of the audacity of my own thought. I don't have something to sign off with. There you go. A picture of me and my sister, my little sister Alex, who's my other half. We may look like ourselves or not in this photo, but that is actually 2 different entities. That's Lucy and that's Carol. They work at the same office. Lucy is very austere and religious and loves cats, especially cat sweaters. Carol, well, she doesn't have braces in this picture, but Carol has braces. She's dating a man named Harold. Lucy gets very controlling over this. She once unplugged Carol's phone line so that she couldn't speak to Harold when they were having a weekend away together making casseroles and carrot cake. And again, they met because they work at the same office. This is the kind of insanity I've instilled in my significantly younger sister. This is the kind of insanity I indulge in whenever I can. I get to masquerade as it being part of my career, and you know what? It totally did help me, because that indulging in that creativity and character creation is key. So these are 2 characters that we used to pretend to be. Like, literally, her and I would have sleepovers and speak to each other as these creations, and it was just hilarious. And we've got photos similar to this going back through the ages. So that's Lucy and Carol. I never thought Lucy and Carol would be on the internet or see the light of day, but there you have it. So for me and Lucy and Care back there, have a good one. Right on! Keep writing!